Welcome back F11 members to part 2 of the fundamentals of post-production video tutorial for the June issue number 29. So let's work through another image, and this month I want to stick to just using Lightroom because I know many of you do virtually all of your post-production in Lightroom without the recourse of having to use Photoshop or any other application, and there's so much you can do, so let's just demonstrate how that can be done. So this picture of ice on a black sand beach in Iceland is the end product. I've done everything I need to in Lightroom, and if I just show you where we started and the end product, I think you'll agree it's a pretty radical difference. And looking at the image on the left, the raw straight out of the camera, it looks completely washed out and overexposed, doesn't it? But there again, we all know the advantages of exposing to the right, i.e. maximizing the exposure so that the histogram is pushed to the right, therefore maximizing the amount of information we're recording. And we have the ability, if that information is there, to then get to this endpoint here with absolute perfect shadow detail at a range of tones in the picture. So let's work through that process. Okay, so I'm going to go back to loop view and I'm going to press reset down here to go back to where I started. And here we have the histogram showing how I pegged the exposure to the right. I couldn't have given it any more without clipping highlight information. It is pretty much a perfect exposure, but on the back of the camera and looking at it now, it just looks totally gutless. This is just such a good example of how we expose to the right and then pull back the levels, density, contrast, etc. in post-production to get to where we need to be. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is actually looking at the image. I can see up here just a touch of distortion, lens distortion, which you wouldn't normally see, but because the horizon is so close to the top of the frame there, you can just start to pick it up there. All lens distort, of course, a touch, and so this is probably a case for using the inbuilt lens corrections here in Lightroom. And if I just tick on this box here, enable profile corrections, you can see it just removes that distortion and I've got now a perfectly straight horizon. Okay, so let's go back up to the top and as usual work through the process. First thing I'm going to do is look at the black point. By exposing to the right, the darkest tone in the picture, which is represented by these black tones here down on the beach, are not black, they're a muddy grey. We can easily take care of that by adjusting the black point to suit. So I'm going to slide it to the left until the toe of the histogram up here reaches the edge. If I go too far, I'll soon know about it with this lighting up here. The other thing I can do is hold down the Alt slider and it starts to show, as you can see, those little blue specks lighting up when I'm starting to clip my shadows. So I'll go back to that point and take stock. So now I want to pull back the darkness or density of the picture until I'm getting to something quite visually appealing. So I'm going to use the tone curve to do that and just drag down the tone curve until the tones in the main part of the image are around where I want them to be. Now if I go too far, I lose all of these lovely tones of the streaky water down here in the bottom of the frame. At the moment I'm just going to ignore these really black tones of the sand because we're going to come back and deal with those. I'm looking at the tones in the middle range of the image, and round about there I've got this lovely bluey streaky tones there. The top of the image is still looking too bright. Well, we're going to deal with that subsequently. And again I pause and take stock. Now you'll have noticed that by adjusting the tone curve, quite a severe adjustment there, dragging it down that far. Oh, excuse me, take that out. What I've done is the black's starting to clip again, so I need to actually readjust those, and I'm just going to move the black point until I'm getting no clipping, as indicated up here. You often need to, when you start making tone curve adjustments, just go back and fine tune the black and white points. Okay, so that's that done, and again I pause. Now I'm looking at the picture and the black of the beach has gone just too black. I want it to be that stark, rich volcanic ash black, yes, to make that ice really stand out against it, but at the same time I do want a bit of detail there. So I'm going to use the shadow slider here to just move that to the right to fill in just a bit of information there on the beach. Now if I go too far it looks wishy-washy and unreal, so I'm going to go to about 50, and that's really brought in some detail here on the black beach, but it's still black and I'm still getting that wonderful contrast of that ice against the black beach. And again I just pause and consider. Always when you're doing this post-production, it pays to just, rather than just randomly play with sliders and hope to stumble across a solution, to pause and think about what you're doing, look at the picture and analyze how you can make it better. Now the top, I would say half of the image is a bit too bright still, so I'm going to use the Grad Adjustment, and I'm going to now just bring a grad filter down on it with a fairly shallow gradation and use it to just darken down the top of the frame. How much? Well, that's with none in there. I would say, and this is purely subjective, but I want this ice here to stand out against the water in the background. So I'm just going to play with that exposure slider until I get it where I want it, and I would say about that is pretty good. I love this graduated filter tool, in Lightroom, is very flexible and really quite handy to use. Of course, as I've said before, it's no substitute to using a filter in front of the lens to record information, because if highlights are burnt out, there's nothing we can do to get them back. But for just doing what we're doing now, darkening down selective areas of the picture, it's a useful tool. So that's done. I click on done now. I'm just going to pull back my highlights a touch, or experiment with doing that, and see what effect that has. Interesting. I think that's worked quite well. My whites, of course, up here are still not really a pure white. I'm just going to move that to the right a bit there. At the end of the day, this is always going to be subjective, but we're getting pretty close to where I want this picture to be. I'm just going to put another grad on just this sky here. I can fine tune there just by dragging those lines. These lines, that marks where the grad starts. This is the midpoint, and the top line where the grad finishes. Now I come over here, and this is the exposure slider, which either brightens the area of the gradation or darkens it. And in this case I want to darken it, but very little, hardly any, so that you hardly see it really. How much? Well, that's down to me, but I'd say somewhere around about there. It was such a low contrast lighting scene, of course I didn't need to use a grad on the filter at the time. I'd say that's just a touch heavy. I'm gonna I'm not a producer for Top Gear, I don't want to have too heavy a grad on. So I click on done there, and pause to consider where I'm at with this image. So the last thing I want to do is now, just looking at this picture here, this area just appears a little bit too bright to me. So I'm going to use the adjustment brush here, and if I click on the adjustment brush tool up here, I can alter the size of my brush here up or down using the brackets key on my keyboard here. So I'm going to select an area about that size, and I'm just going to brush it across this area that I want to darken down, and maybe a bit over here as well. And then I'm going to do this very subtly here and just darken down that area of the image. Again, you can hardly notice it, but all of these things cumulatively add up to a picture with the kind of tonal range and impact that we want. I now click on Done. I'm aesthetically pretty pleased with this picture now. I'm going to go to my Sharp and Scenic, the last bit here, and just adjust the masking. Again, hold down the Alt key, move the masking to the right. There's a fair bit of detail in the sand and the ice, so I really don't want much, just enough to come in on the sky really. So around about 10, I'd say. And now I'll go back to where I started and compare the two images side by side. Pretty incredible, isn't it, really? And I'm very happy with that picture. And that's it. Took me about 10 minutes to do it on the video. If I were doing it, without explaining what I'm doing, it would be just a few minutes. Just showing you that this art of post-production needn't involve long, laborious hours. It's all about having the clarity of thought to know what to do with your pictures. Okay, good luck, happy exposing, and we'll see you again next month.